it's not even true that it's our money system, and it's not shown to us in any way that you know that this existence of debts is relevant, irrelevant. What are the ramifications of it? What justified it? Why is money that way? You know, it's just left hanging there as if we can draw something from it. In some, what the author evidently hopes here is that it substantiates this idea that money as a debt is justified, qualified, or even a fact. As I've said, it's not a debt. It's a promissory obligation, which is to pay and retire principal from circulation, since the real creditor who gave up the $100,000 house is paid in full. Okay, so this is just completely irrelevant. Next quote. Everyone subconsciously knows banks do not lend money. Where did they learn that? When I began saying that we do not borrow money from banks, there was hardly a person ever who didn't think I was utterly crazy. Now someone's saying everyone subconsciously knows banks do not lend money. But why did they even think that? Because somehow they got that idea somewhere. Where would that be? Did they come up with it themselves? Let's read a little farther and we'll find out. When you draw on your savings account, the bank doesn't tell you you can't do this because it has lent the money to somebody else. Well, in truth, that's rather obvious if you understand that banks do not lend money and you start thinking about it and you say, that money has been lent out, but they will give it to you somehow. Okay? Well, that's a reasonable deduction, but still, it's relatively irrelevant. We don't understand what its place is. You can't draw all the further deductions you need to draw from that fact if that's the end of it. That only has meaning if you understand the obfuscation of the currency. And where does this quote come from? It comes from DKD.net. Dave Kidd. Okay. Now Dave Kidd was one. I haven't looked him up recently. I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. But Dave Kidd was one of the very first monetary reform sites in Australia. I found he was plagiarizing my work. I wrote to him about it. He did, he condescended. He would give me credit and all that. And we became friends. I even helped him put his site together. It was the first days of the internet, and I did his logo for him, but that's where this comes from. So you can't say that it's reasonable to think that this person who offers this quote on those pages didn't realize this because, they were exposed to my work, which explains this obfuscation of the currency, you see. And yet the quote, well, it's reasonable and true. All by itself, in and of itself, it's meaningless. You cannot understand it unless you understand the obfuscation of the currency. Which brings up another point. I mean, you have all these people saying, oh, well, money can't be subject to interest. How do they know that? You can't even articulate that. You don't know that. How do you articulate it? You have to put it in the very terms in which it exists. You can't say, well, it's a Ponzi scheme. Every person that ever says Ponzi scheme to me, I ask them, I says, can you tell me from the definition of a Ponzi scheme what the issue is and how we solve it? No one can answer that question. They never will because it's a preposterous term. People who solve problems don't give preposterous names to them. Plagiarists do, so that they have a name that appeals to people they can make money at. What they're doing is concentrating on making money from this, which takes, of course, attention away from it and introduces all this further division, as does this proposition that money is dead is our issue. So he goes on, here's a third quote, and I haven't even really prepared for this, but I'm just reading this stuff, and it's it's incredible. If all the bank loans were paid, no one could have a bank deposit, and there would not be a dollar of coin or currency in circulation. You know, do the math, folks. That's absolutely not true. Yes, there wouldn't be a dollar of coin or currency in circulation. It would be negative to a huge degree. What we owe in debt, when you buy a house for $100,000 and you pay $400,000 of interest on it, you pay $500,000 over 20 or 30 years, whatever, for a $100,000 house. At the end of that 20 or 30 years, over which you've paid $500,000 for a $100,000 house, $100,000 of principal, $400,000 of interest, what do we have? We have a $500,000 debt related, in fact, to that original $100,000 home. How do we have that? Because all the while that we're servicing that debt, we have to maintain a vital circulation in order for us to do so. That means we have to borrow back into circulation all of the principal and interest that we pay out of the circulation. So the principal is retained as the original debt. It's mathematically impossible to pay it down. And the $400,000 of interest has been converted into debt because as we paid it out of circulation, we had to borrow it back into circulation to maintain a vital circulation so that we could persist in servicing this artificial falsified debt to the banking system, who are mere publishers of evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. So we know the first sentence of this is false. It isn't that no money would exist in relation to a $100,000 case of money that exists when it's loaned into circulation here. We've just proven that, in fact, if the obligation was paid, not the debt, the obligation. Why is it an obligation? Because when we say we have a $100,000 debt, we're kidding ourselves. You don't have a $100,000 debt under this obfuscation of the currency. You have a $500,000 obligation. That's what you're going to be out. That's what you're obligated to pay. That's the real debt. If you want to use the word debt, wrongly, that's the real debt, $500,000. So let's reevaluate this sentence. If all the bank loans were paid, no one could have a bank deposit, and there could not be a dollar of coin or currency in circulation. It's not even true. Not even close to true. When $100,000 of $500,000 is paid, there would be no money in circulation. Not a cent in deposit, not a cent of dollar or coin or currency in circulation. So, by the case that we've just cited, if 1/5 of the circulation, when the obligation is first introduced, is paid off, 1/5 of the circulation would be sufficient to eliminate the entire circulation. But let's read the rest of it. This is a staggering thought. Well, I guess it is, but let's get it right to realize how truly staggering all this is, especially when it costs $2 for that banking system to issue the $100,000 into circulation, to just pretend that publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other comprises a debt to the bank. And that's what's staggering, folks, to understand it's not debt, it's this obfuscation of the currency, which just takes a promissory obligation and falsifies that into a debt to a mere publisher of the evidence of the debt. Now that's staggering. Think about that. That's staggering. We are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Bullshit. We think we are. I mean, it's like, you were raised in a cave, with, 20 other children, and every day a bear comes in the cave and grabs one of you and drags him outside and eats him in peace, and you think, oh, well, the only place to live is the cave, or gee, let's just let the bear come in here. It'll never get me. We're not dependent on commercial banks. And I mean, Ellen Hodgson Brown took years to learn this, but, I've been saying it for 40 years, since I was 16 years old, and I mean, I think we should all take that as some kind of an insult, because it is impossible to suffer circulatory inflation if you merely collateralize debts. Our problems are not circulatory inflation either. The problem isn't that money is a debt, because the fact that it is a debt is what obligates us to pay it out of circulation, which is the only thing that makes the person who's consuming of others' production pay for it with an equal measure of their production. There's nothing unjust about that whatsoever, you see. And so it is important to understand these things, which is the whole reason that I have to rise up and say, okay, money is a debt. Sorry, explained this 43 years ago and every day since. I repeat the explanation to someone, and here we are, yet again, repeating the explanation as a result of a pretended authority who's doing this to make money, and we'll see by some very, very preposterous, exercises here. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation. Then it goes on to say cash or credit. Well, the first part made me stop dead in my tracks. No way. Someone has to borrow every dollar in circulation. That's the lie. That's the goddamn lie. If you think you have to borrow money that doesn't exist, it's like, let's go over to Mike's house and borrow a 14-inch crescent wrench for him. He has one, okay? But Mike doesn't have one, okay? And Mike gives you a piece of paper that says it's a 14-inch crescent wrench, and then he asks you to pay him 5 crescent wrenches in return. Okay? And you thought you borrowed a crescent wrench from Mike. That's how in error you are when you think you borrow money from banks, which doesn't even exist, which is only created as evidence of your promissory obligation. All you're doing is allowing one publisher only to publish evidence of your promissory obligation. The only real evidence of which exists is the contract you sign when you pretended to yourself that you were borrowing money which didn't exist from a bank. It's preposterous. This is error upon error upon error, okay? But what is it offered for? It's like filling in holes of the reason all this is in front of us is so that this guy could stand up and make this video as if somebody else has provided information with which concurs with it, which makes him an authority. Although there's no logic provided, as you see, whatsoever, which tells you that indeed you're even borrowing money from a bank. Is there a debt? No. The bank never gave up lawful consideration. They're merely publishing evidence of your promissory obligation. So this is preposterous. And yet, what is it? It's the basis for which this video is offered, that our problems are that money is issued as a debt. Disgusting. It goes on, this same third quote. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. We are absolutely without a permanent money system. Yeah, because instead of supporting mathematically perfected economy, which this preposterous authority cannot invalidate, has not invalidated, has not even raised a factoid which could even discredit it, even intuitively or mistakenly somehow. Has he proven that there's an alternate solution to inflation and deflation? Absolutely not. An alternate solution to inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest? Absolutely not. So what is he doing here? He's assuming that my proof of the third case is obvious. We all understand it. The solution of it, too, is obvious. We all understand it. This isn't about money as debt being subject to interest being the problem. It assumes, nonetheless,